Honourable Members of Congress, staff members, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for this opportunity to speak today on political developments in Bangladesh, a country which is growing in strategic importance in the Indo-Pacific theatre. To fully understand modern Bangladesh, we must revisit the pivotal events of 1971, when the country fought to free itself from Pakistan's rule. In the 1970 elections, the Awami League, led by Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, achieved a sweeping victory and demanded autonomy. Rather than honour the result, Pakistan's leadership launched Operation Searchlight on March 25, 1971. The campaign was brutal. Dhaka, the capital, became a killing field overnight, with professors, students, civilians, and especially the minority Hindus were singled out for execution. Even Americans were not spared. Father William Evans from Pittsfield, Massachusetts, was shot at point-blank range by Pakistani forces for being Christian. In the face of widespread international silence, one American official, Archer K. Blood, dared to speak out. In his now famous Blood telegram, he condemned what he described as genocide, sharply criticising the White House for its failures to denounce the atrocities. This diplomatic rift continues to reverberate, contributing to long-standing tensions and suspicions in US-India relations. 3 million people were killed and more than 200,000 Bengali women were subjected to mass rape. 10 million refugees fled to India, with millions more internally displaced. Against overwhelming odds, Bangladesh, aided by Indian forces, eventually secured its independence. Yet today, elements of Muhammad Yunus's administration and radical Islamist factions seek to challenge or outright deny these foundational truths. They go as far as to recast the war criminals of 1971 as liberators, effectively rewriting the very history upon which Bangladesh was built. History has always moved in dramatic cycles in Bangladesh. The fall of Sheikh Hasina, who had governed for over a decade, marked another turning point. Once seen as a vanguard of democratic values, her rule gradually turned authoritarian. Opponents were arrested en masse, dissent was met with force, and allegations of electoral fraud mounted with each successive election. Discontent grew until it erupted into mass protests, setting the stage for her removal last year. To fully grasp this moment, we must recall the caretaker government crisis of January 11, 2007, simply now known as 1/11. Then Bangladesh teetered on the brink of chaos, with Sheikh Hasina and a long-time rival Khalida Zia locked in a power struggle, while Al-Qaeda and other groups tried to get a foothold in the country. The result was a military-backed caretaker government that claimed to offer technocratic governance as a short-term fix to stop a potential civil war. During that interlude, Nobel laureate Muhammad Yunus attempted a bold entry into politics by announcing his party, Nagarik Shakti, or Citizens' Power. Global accolades for his microfinance model, especially through Grameen Bank, had already earned him significant Western support, including strong ties with American political figures like Bill and Hillary Clinton. But domestic politics proved more difficult. Yunus's political experiment fizzled out and he withdrew, only to re-emerge years later. The Monsoon Revolution and minority persecution. The turmoil that unseated Hasina has been dubbed the Monsoon Revolution, yet a darker undercurrent ran beneath the revolutionary fervour. There was the targeted persecution of minority communities, Hindus, Buddhists, Christians, and indigenous peoples, who were subjected to coordinated violence. Instead of confronting the reality of religious intolerance, government officials around Yunus framed these attacks as purely political, not fueled by religious extremists. Perpetrators went unpunished, reinforcing the climate of fear among minorities. In an especially concerning turn, movements such as ISKCON or the Hare Krishna movement in Bangladesh found themselves labelled as terrorists. The grim record in Bangladesh cannot be separated from its history of persecuting religious minorities. At independence, the country was envisioned as secular, but waves of violence have undermined this promise for decades. Hindus once numbered close to 30% of what was then East Pakistan in 1947, today hover at around 7%. Draconian legal mechanisms like the Enemy Property Act, later renamed the Vested Property Act, facilitate the confiscation of Hindu-owned lands, forcing many to flee. Mob attacks on Hindu temples and festivals continue to this day, with perpetrators often escaping justice. The Ahmadi Muslims, who have been similarly targeted, they've been labelled heretics by groups such as Hafazat-e-Islam and the radical Jamaat-e-Islami. In 2004, the BNP Jamaat government capitulated to extremist forces and banned Ahmadi publications. The community faces boycotts, threats and regular harassment, with limited recourse to state protection. Christians have also encountered hostility. Churches have been attacked and set on fire, pastors killed and threatened, and congregations intimidated or forced to convert. Though a small minority, Christians remain vulnerable to attacks from Islamist extremists. Buddhists and the indigenous people in the Chittagong Hill Tracts endure systematic marginalisation, suffering land seizures and cultural erasure. In each case, Bangladesh government action is minimal. If Bangladesh hopes to preserve any vestige of pluralism, it must break this pattern of impunity. The rise of intolerance and brutal government crackdowns. Meanwhile, violent crackdowns against dissent have intensified. Last month, UNIS launched Operation Devil Hunt. Police and security forces have used heavy-handed tactics to suppress protests over social, political and economic grievances. Government critics, including journalists and opposition figures, have found themselves incarcerated without due process. While Hasina's downfall removed one oppressive regime, powerful new forces have lurked in the background. Amidst this chaos, the United Kingdom and others have updated their security assessments on Bangladesh, warning visitors of rising religious Islamist extremism. Escalating attacks on students, minority religious congregations, and progressive voices underscore the power of radical Islamists. Their growing influence has coincided with the installation of the UNIS interim government, raising international fears that the country's fragile democratic experiment has been collapsing under pressure from extremist factions. Human rights defenders in Bangladesh have grown conspicuously silent. A recent Human Rights Watch report titled "After the Monsoon Revolution, a Roadmap to Lasting Security Sector Reform in Bangladesh" spotlighted a familiar pattern of abuses. Though the interim government pledged to break with the past, Human Rights Watch alleged that new ways of repression by the UNIS administration have targeted perceived Awami League supporters and government critics. UNIS's government has also stripped journalists of their press credentials, and they have continued with the policy of stifling free speech. Reporters Without Borders have also publicly condemned these steps. The Human Rights Watch report offered a range of proposals, from repealing draconian laws that muzzle critics to establishing checks on security forces. Yet many activists, once vocal under the Hasina regime, have not pressed these issues under UNIS's rule for fear of being labelled as supporters of the former government. The press are also facing violent campaigns by radical Islamists to curb their reporting. Prothama Law and the Daily Star facing the worst of these coordinated attacks. Despite international hopes that UNIS would usher in reforms, his administration quickly caught controversy. One of the most disturbing moves involves releasing Al-Qaeda-linked figures, individuals once imprisoned on charges of plotting against Western targets. Many have warned that freeing such figures could transform Bangladesh into a fertile ground for global jihad. Corruption scandal also riddled the legal system. High-profile investigations involving the FBI and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police have been unceremoniously dropped. Witnesses have gone silent, cases have been dismissed on flimsy technicalities, and those accused of massive graft conveniently walk free. Those involved in terrorism have also been let off. Opponents claim that in UNIS's Bangladesh, the judicial apparatus has once again become an instrument of selective justice. Even more shocking in Bangladesh has been the warming relationship with Pakistan, its former oppressor from 1971. This deliberate rapprochement has alarmed neighbouring India, which had historically supported Bangladesh's independence. Some in Bangladesh threatened to reignite tensions in Assam and other vulnerable border areas in India, suggesting a massive tilt towards Islamabad. A corresponding national debate launched by military figures on the possibility of Bangladesh acquiring nuclear weapons from Pakistan has made regional stability an even more pressing concern. In the midst of these tense developments, Muhammad Yunus remained largely silent, despite his international stature. His unwillingness to publicly address the potential risk of nuclear proliferation have baffled critics at home and abroad. Bangladesh stands at a defining junction. Born from the bloodshed of 1971, it once aspired to be a secular, democratic nation, but now risks succumbing to a vicious cycle of authoritarian rule and Islamist extremism. The ouster of Sheikh Hasina brought hope for change, but has so far failed to deliver genuine reform. Muhammad Yunus appears ill-prepared for the entrenched challenges he faces. Even worse, he appears willing to accommodate extremists, as evidenced by his appointment of a former Hafazati Islam leader to oversee religious affairs. Hafazati Islam has long demanded anti-blasphemy laws, anti-women policies, and aggressively confronted Bangladesh's secular and pluralist traditions, making this move profoundly unsettling to those who fear a surge in religious militancy and intolerance. Why did Yunus give a known fundamentalist a seat at the table? Bangladesh's soul is at stake. Radical Islamists are actively challenging the state. Today, Bangladesh must decide, will it remain true to the promise that emerged from the trauma of 1971, or will it allow a new tyranny, fueled by intolerance and injustice, to define its future? The nation's next step will determine whether it can transform the storm of the monsoon revolution into a lasting peace that honours the lives sacrificed for freedom. America also faces a difficult balancing act. Does it support Yunus, a friend of the USA, who is making the exact same mistakes as Sheikh Hasina while failing to challenge Islamist extremism? Or will America simply walk away and leave it to others? Thank you all for your time.